Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome back to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project, filling in for the great Dan Proft. This week, I'm joined by my friend Ted Dabrowski, who's the Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. And Ted, the Tax Foundation has released its annual report on tax burden by state. And, I'm getting tired of reading these reports from places all over the country where Illinois is ranked always at the bottom. It turns out here that we're essentially fourth or fifth for having the most burdensome tax system. That shouldn't surprise any of our listeners who pay those exorbitant taxes. What do you think?
Well, this is, again, like you said, not a surprise because report after report shows that we are very high taxed. I think what's interesting about this report is now that we've jumped to the fourth or fifth spot. So we're moving very close to the top. And it's, what's embedded in that, we have the second highest property taxes in the nation. People feel it, they know it. And after Chicago's recent property tax hikes, we should move into the highest property taxes in the nation. This hurts. And we need to understand it better. Yeah,
and Mike Madigan, as you know, we always talk about Mike Madigan, the leader of the House of Representatives, basically in control of the legislature at this point. He is proposing that we continue to increase taxes to cover a hole in our budget. Obviously, that can't persist. Joining us now is Nicole Kading. Nicole is the author of the report. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, we're suffering here in Illinois under this tax burden. What Ted sort of mentioned a little bit in the lead up. What factors do you think are present here that are different in other states that make us such a high tax burden state?
So what this report is really looking at the tax burdens is we're not only measuring the effect of it's a measure of personal income that goes towards paying taxes, and we're not just counting the taxes that people in Illinois are paying to the state of Illinois or to localities in Illinois. We're also counting the taxes that they pay to other states because we know that taxes actually shift across state lines. So the easiest way to explain this is let's say that someone in Chicago decides to go down to Orlando to go to Disney World. They take their family down to Florida, and they're going to be paying sales taxes on their hotel, on their rental car, on the food and beverage that they consume. And so those taxes would get recorded as being collected in Florida. But we actually know that the economic incidence of those taxes is really back in Illinois, back in Chicago where they live. And so we're not only trying to capture the amount that individuals pay in taxes to their state or to their locality, but also the amount of taxes they pay to other states and to other localities.
Hey, Nicole, I'm taking my kids to Disney World this spring, and now that trip is actually more economically painful than I thought when we were paying for it along the way. Ted, what are your thoughts with respect to this report and what the work that Nicole has done on it?
Well, what we're worried about in Illinois is, how much taxes we pay, and we're not getting the services that we think we should get, and it's why so many people we've seen have left Illinois. And I think the big issue is, how did we get to the point that we're ranked so high? Why is it that we're here? And a lot of that has to do with how many units of government we have, overlapping units of government, more and more spending, strong unions. And I'm curious from Nicole, what do the bad states all look like? All those that are at the top, what makes them special that they want to tax so much?
Well, so the states that are at the highest, we're talking Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Wisconsin. Those are the top five in our report. And so those are all very high-tax states. And then they also have high concentrations of capital gains in their states. And in our model, with states that have large amounts of capital gains, they bear an undue burden of business taxation across the country because we know that the economic literature is very clear on this, that when we tax corporations, it's easy to say that we're taxing some big business business and the corporation is paying the taxes. But we know that the corporation really doesn't pay those taxes. They end up shifting it to their workers, to their shareholders, or to their consumers. And so those, where there is a lot of capital gains, there's a lot of burden being placed on those business taxes.
Yeah, what I'm interested in, Nicole, is what you just said there about the cost shifting of the corporate tax to the workers, but also to the consumers. I mean, do you see in your report or somewhere sort of on the outlier of the research where costs of products, services, et cetera, are increased in these 5 states? And so there's a hidden tax on top of the tax that you can actually calculate because these costs of the high taxes are being passed on to the consumers in those states.
So that absolutely happens. So what is that those corporations, they will pass that along. And so it might not just be on the consumers, but it might be on their workers. So we could talk about if we were to raise the corporate income tax in Illinois. Each corporation is going to shift that tax a little different. It's going to depend on their industry and what kind of products they sell and how they're made up. But they might reduce benefits for their workers. They might reduce the amount they pay their workers. They might just have fewer workers, or they might decide to raise costs for their consumers, so that you might see a higher cost of goods when you go to purchase products at the store. And so those get shifted from the corporation really to the individual. The individual is the one who's actually paying those taxes, not the business.
So Nicole, aside from Wisconsin, I see that the states bordering Illinois have much lower tax rates. They're in the middle of the country, in the middle of the top 50. What does Illinois need to do to become more competitive?
Well, so I think that what needs to happen is we need to look at the tax structure in Illinois. Of course, there have been some decreases in tax rates the last couple of years as those temporary tax increases have gone away. But I know that there's still a lot of urge to increase taxes. And as you mentioned, property taxes are particularly burdensome in the state of Illinois. So not only should listeners, they should keep an eye of what policymakers are doing in Springfield. They should keep an eye on what policymakers are doing in their local governments, but also look at other states. Indiana has been a great example for what tax reform can look like in a Midwestern state.
Nicole Kading of the Tax Foundation, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.